April 18th, 1942, 04:17 a.m. Somewhere in the cold, gray emptiness of the North Pacific, the deck of the USS Hornet shudders under the weight of 16 twin-engine B-25 Mitchell bombers, each one crouched like a steel predator waiting for release. Wind tears across the flight deck. Salt spray lashes against metal. The ocean is dark, restless, almost warning. Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle stands near the island structure, goggles pushed up onto his forehead, coat flapping violently in the freezing wind. He squints toward the horizon, where a thin band of pale dawn is beginning to rise. You can almost feel the cold through the fabric of his flight jacket. It cuts straight through. All around him, the deck crew moves with tense, deliberate precision. There is no chatter, no wasted motion. Everyone knows the stakes. Because this mission was never supposed to launch here, not this far from Japan, not with seas this rough, not with barely enough fuel to reach China afterward. But everything changed minutes ago. A lookout spotted a Japanese picket boat, then another, then another. Even after they were sunk, the fear was the same. The Japanese might have sent a radio signal before going under. If the fleet was detected, the raid would be lost. If the bombers waited any longer, the entire task force risked destruction. So the order was given. Launch early. Launch now. 16 bombers, 16 crews who understood that launching hundreds of miles early meant one thing. They would almost certainly not make it home. The icy wind slams across the deck again as the first B-25 is rolled into position. Its engines roar to life, a deep, shaking thunder that vibrates through the steel deck and into the bones of every man aboard. Some of the sailors watching had never heard a bomber take off from a carrier before. Nobody had, not in the U.S. Navy, not anywhere in the world. This had never been done. The ship's bow rises sharply with each rolling swell, then slams back down, drenching the front crews in icy spray. Doolittle himself walks toward his aircraft, stopping for a moment to look at the lineup of bombers behind him. Men lean out of cockpit windows, faces pale but steady, waiting for his signal. He doesn't need to say it aloud. They all know what this means. America had been humiliated at Pearl Harbor just 4 months earlier. Cities burned, ships sank, thousands died. Across the Pacific, Japan believed the United States was finished, a crippled nation without the strength, speed, or spirit to strike back. But now, in this cold Pacific dawn, Doolittle and his men would prove them wrong. A deck officer raises 2 bright signal flags. The roar of engines deepens. "Stand by," he yells over the wind. Crewmen scramble to the edges of the deck, gripping railings, boots sliding on the slick metal. The ocean heaves again, lifting the bow, then dropping it as if trying to swallow the ship whole. Doolittle climbs into the cockpit of the first bomber. He gives one last look at the carrier, at the men watching him, at the endless gray sea beyond. Then he pulls the canopy shut. Inside the cockpit, everything feels tighter, heavier. His co-pilot, Lieutenant Richard Cole, nods once, a silent confirmation. They are committed. There is no turning back. The signal officer sweeps his flags downward. Doolittle pushes the throttles forward. The engines scream. The bomber shudders, wheels rolling over the rough wooden planks of the flight deck. Spray smashes against the nose. The ocean ahead looks impossibly close, too close. The bomber races forward, 50 feet, 100 feet, 150 feet. The bow drops again, the worst possible timing. For a moment, it feels like the plane will slam straight into the rising swell. Sailors on deck hold their breath. The wheels leave the deck. The bomber dips, falling, then steadies, catching a thin pocket of air just above the waves. For a few horrifying seconds, the plane skims the water, engines straining, wings wobbling. Then slowly, steadily, it begins to climb. One of the sailors exhales. "He made it," he whispers. But the mission is only beginning. Behind Doolittle's aircraft, 15 more bombers wait, each with its own crew, its own fears, its own destiny. And every one of them knows something Doolittle hasn't yet told them. Intelligence believes the Japanese mainland has never been more alert or more dangerous. And the moment these bombers appear over Tokyo, the entire Pacific War will shift. The winter of 1944 had settled over Europe like a heavy, unmoving curtain. The air felt colder than the months before, and the sound of distant artillery rolled across the frozen landscape with a tired, hollow echo. Everyone, soldiers, officers, prisoners, guards, felt the weight of a war drifting toward its final chapters. But inside the field offices of the Allied Command, a strange new mission was quietly forming. A mission many believed would fail before it ever began. It started with a simple question that carried enormous consequences. What should be done with the thousands of German prisoners who were surrendering every week? Many of the Allied camps in Europe were already crowded. Supplies were stretched thin, and the winter had made transport slow and unpredictable. Moving prisoners from one part of the continent to another had become a complicated puzzle with too many pieces missing. Then, one evening, inside a dimly lit briefing room, an idea surfaced, first as a suggestion, then as an argument, and finally as a plan. The United States would begin transferring selected groups of German POWs across the Atlantic, far from the front lines, far from escape routes, far from the collapsing German command structure. They would be held in camps deep inside America's quiet countryside. To some officers, the plan felt bold. To others, it felt unnecessary. To a few, it felt impossible. "Thousands of miles by ship?" one officer murmured. "In wartime waters? With U-boats still active? It's madness." But the logistics officers persisted. They explained that the United States had space, food, medical care, and the industrial ability to build and maintain enormous camps safely. The Midwest and the South, with their long stretches of farmland, could house tens of thousands of prisoners without straining resources needed in Europe. Still, doubts lingered like fog. Ships were needed to carry soldiers, fuel, and equipment. Every journey across the ocean held risks, and if a vessel filled with prisoners were sunk, the political consequences would be huge. But the alternative, overcrowded European camps, was becoming more dangerous each day. So the plan moved forward, slowly and quietly at first. Behind the scenes, naval officers calculated routes. Army engineers prepared blueprints for new camps. Medical staff created guidelines for nutrition, care, and disease prevention. And intelligence officers debated whether the transfer of prisoners would lead to valuable information. Some believed it might. Most of the German soldiers who had surrendered were young men, barely trained, swept up in battles they no longer believed in. Others were older, exhausted from years of fighting, their faces shaped by fear and cold. Bringing them to America, some argued, might reveal what they truly thought about the war, and perhaps what they thought of the men leading it. Yet, even as planning continued, there was an unspoken question that no one wanted to say aloud. What if the prisoners were not prepared for what they were about to see? What if the journey itself changed them? For many German soldiers, America was not a real place. It was a faraway land described in rumors, stories told by officers to frighten or control them. Some had been told it was a land of factories filled with smoke, a place where prisoners would be treated harshly. Others had heard stranger tales that Americans were inexperienced, weak, or careless. None of these stories were true, but the prisoners did not know that, not yet. The mission moved into its final stage when the first group of selected POWs was quietly assembled at a temporary camp near the French coast. The days leading up to departure were unusual for them. There were fewer marches, fewer inspections, fewer shouted orders. The guards were firm but calm. The atmosphere, though tense, carried a strange sense of transition. The prisoners noticed the cold wind from the sea. They noticed new officers arriving. They noticed the way guards spoke in short, practical sentences, as if preparing for something big. But they still did not know where they were going. Some guessed Britain, others guessed another camp in the French countryside. The boldest whispered a rumor that spread quickly through the barracks. They are sending us far away, across the ocean. The night before departure, many prisoners could not sleep. They lay awake on thin mattresses, listening to the distant sound of waves and to the soft creaking of wooden walls in the winter wind. Some whispered to each other. Some prayed, some simply stared at the ceiling, trying to imagine what waited beyond the dark horizon. Before dawn, guards entered quietly and instructed everyone to gather their few belongings. No shouting, no harsh commands. The mood was steady, organized, and strangely calm. The prisoners marched in small groups toward the harbor, where the outlines of large transport ships rose against the pale morning sky. Fog drifted across the water like a slow-moving veil. The ships looked enormous, silent steel giants preparing for a long journey. Several prisoners stopped walking, stunned. They had never seen anything like it. American naval officers guided them up the ramps with firm, respectful gestures. The prisoners, uncertain but obedient, followed. They felt the ship vibrate under their boots, smelled the mixture of salt and diesel, and heard the heavy chains tightening as crates and supplies were secured. For many of them, this was the moment everything changed. They did not know their destination. They did not know what America truly looked like. They did not know they were about to witness something that would challenge everything they had been told. As the anchor lifted and the ship slowly drifted away from the French coast, the prisoners remained on deck, watching Europe fade into the mist. Their home continent disappeared behind them, shrinking into a thin line on the horizon. And with it, the world they knew, war, hardship, fear, and propaganda, began to fall away too. The mission, once doubted, once dismissed, had officially begun. And none of the men aboard those ships, not the guards, not the officers, not the prisoners themselves, could have predicted what they were about to discover on the other side of the ocean. The train moved steadily through the late autumn countryside, its wheels clicking in a soft, unchanging rhythm that almost felt like a heartbeat. For many of the German prisoners inside, it was the first moment of stillness they had experienced in months. There were no explosions in the distance, no shouting officers, no panic in the air. Only the muted sound of steel rolling over steel, and the sigh of the wind brushing past the wooden freight cars. Most of the men didn't speak. They sat on rough benches, coats wrapped tightly around them, helmets long gone, uniforms creased and worn. Their faces were tired, drained by uncertainty. No one knew exactly where they were going. They had been told only one thing. Their destination was somewhere far away, across an ocean, across a world. It was strange. Some of them had imagined that captivity would be harsh, maybe even brutal. But what they experienced so far was different. The American guards were serious, but not cruel. They kept order, but they did not mistreat anyone. and this alone added another layer of confusion. War had taught them that enemies came with sharp teeth and cold intentions, yet here the atmosphere felt oddly controlled, quiet, almost neutral. As the train passed across a ridge, someone near the small barred window whispered, "Look, factories." Outside, the landscape opened into a valley filled with enormous industrial complexes. Rows of chimneys, tall and straight, sent thin trails of smoke into the sky. Warehouses stretched across the horizon. Trains moved along parallel tracks, not one or two, but dozens, crossing and weaving like veins of iron. The German soldiers stared in silence. They came from a country where industry was powerful, but here the scale felt different, larger, endless, almost mythic. A young prisoner named Otto leaned closer to the window. He was no older than 20. His voice was barely audible. "It never stops," he said. "It just keeps going." And in the strange stillness of the moment, several others nodded. For the first time, they began to understand the whispers they had heard during the war, that America's strength was not only in soldiers, but in the invisible, unstoppable machinery behind them, a nation that could build without resting, a country where factories ran day and night, where resources seemed infinite, where the trains never slept. As the landscape shifted, the industrial zone slowly gave way to open fields, huge plains of golden grass stretching farther than any of them had ever seen. Small farmhouses appeared like quiet islands. Grain silos rose into the sky like watchtowers. Livestock grazed peacefully, undisturbed by the passing train. It was beautiful, more beautiful than any of them expected, and it made some prisoners lower their heads in thought. War had painted the world in harsh colors, but here the colors were soft, warm earth, calm skies, and quiet light. Hours passed. The rhythm of the train became hypnotic. Some men began drifting into uneasy sleep. Others softly exchanged stories about home, not about battles, not about victory or defeat, but about families, forests, small streets, and simple memories they longed for. When the train finally slowed, they felt a pulse of tension move through the car. Were they arriving? Was this the end of the journey, or only another step? Outside, American soldiers walked alongside the cars, giving clear instructions. No shouting, no roughness, just procedure. The prisoners stepped out one by one, blinking under the open sky, and then they froze. Before them stood an enormous military camp, not a battlefield camp with trenches or ruins, but a perfectly organized complex with clean pathways, rows of white wooden barracks, tall fences, guard towers, and fields extending in all directions. It looked less like a prison and more like a small town. There were kitchens, workshops, infirmary buildings, even a soccer field carved into open space. The POWs whispered among themselves. Some of them were stunned, some of them confused, others didn't know what to make of it at all. They had expected conditions similar to the Eastern Front, or worse, punishment, chaos, or fear. Instead, they saw structure, stability, a place where daily life could continue, even in captivity. One of the American officers, older, calm, and steady in his posture, walked forward. He addressed the group through a translator. His voice carried authority, but also a strange sense of reassurance. "You will be treated according to the Geneva Convention. You will receive food, work assignments, and medical care. Follow the rules, and there will be no trouble." The prisoners listened carefully. Some of them were skeptical, some of them were relieved. But one thing was clear: nothing about this matched the stories they had been told. Soon they were lined up and processed, their names recorded, their belongings checked, their conditions inspected. Not rushed, not mistreated, simply handled. And as they walked through the main gate into what would become their new world, the truth settled quietly inside them. They were far from home, far beyond anything they had ever imagined. And whatever they believed about the enemy, whatever the propaganda had taught them, was now beginning to unravel. This wasn't the destination they expected, but it was the beginning of a chapter they would never forget. A chapter where fear would give way to reflection, where exhaustion would slowly turn into understanding, and where for the first time in a long time, the horizon did not look like death, but an unknown path leading somewhere unexpectedly human.
When the long train finally screeched to a halt, the German prisoners lifted their heads, expecting the same sight they had seen at every rail stop across Europe. Rows of armed guards, hostile faces, and the bleak gray shapes of barracks waiting to swallow them. But what they saw instead was different. The station platform looked strangely open under the bright American sun. There were guards, yes, but they stood at ease, rifles slung casually over their shoulders as if the new arrivals were not enemies, but simply travelers who needed direction. A few locals watched from a distance, farmers in overalls, a mother holding her child, curious teenagers leaning on bicycles. But there was no hatred in their eyes, only curiosity, cautious but gentle. The prisoners stepped down slowly, blinking at the clarity of the sky. Back in Europe, the air had grown thick with smoke, dust, and tension. Here, the atmosphere felt lighter, cleaner, almost unreal. One prisoner, a thin artilleryman, barely in his 20s, whispered, "Is this really a POW camp?" The answer would become clearer as they were guided onto waiting trucks. The engines rumbled softly, and the vehicles rolled through a landscape unlike any they had known. Wide fields of corn, neat rows of trees, barns painted bright red, and farmhouses standing proudly under the open sky. For men who had spent years surrounded by ruins and rubble, the calmness was almost unsettling. No bomb craters, no broken walls, no burned-out homes, just a quiet land that seemed untouched by the war raging across the ocean. As the convoy approached their designated camp, the prisoners waited for the familiar dread to return, the feeling that something harsh, something punishing must be waiting behind the gates. But again, surprise was waiting for them. The POW camp was fenced, yes, but the barbed wire was ordinary, almost minimal. Guard towers were spaced far apart, not looming or oppressive. The barracks were wooden, simple but sturdy and clean. A small garden grew near the entrance, and a line of laundry hung between two posts, swaying gently in the wind. Some prisoners exchanged confused glances. This did not look like a battlefield prison. It looked organized, stable, even humane. As they marched through the gates, a short American officer stepped forward. His uniform was crisp but not intimidating, his face tired but kind. He raised his voice so everyone could hear. "You'll follow the rules and we'll treat you fairly. You work, you rest, you eat. No one harms you here unless you try to harm someone first. That's all." The prisoners listened in stunned silence. The officer's tone was firm but not cruel. He spoke to them as men, not enemies. Inside the camp, the surprises kept coming. They were shown their bunks, simple cot beds with real blankets, not straw sacks. The barracks had windows that actually opened. The mess hall offered warm food that smelled nothing like the thin, watery soups many had grown used to during the war. A prisoner at the front of the line stared down at the tray of bread, beans, potatoes, and a small slice of pie, muttering under his breath, "This is more than we ate during whole campaigns." Across the room, another prisoner almost laughed from shock. "Heaven help us, they're feeding us better than our own army fed us." The guards didn't yell, they didn't strike anyone. They behaved like professionals, and that in itself felt strange. But perhaps the biggest shock came when work assignments were explained. The prisoners were allowed, sometimes encouraged, to work outside the camp. Farms, lumber yards, construction sites, canneries. The tasks were not meant to punish, they simply filled the gaps left by American men who had gone to war. The German soldiers discussed it among themselves that night. Many expected hidden motives or traps. Some believed it must be propaganda. Others simply stared at the ceiling, trying to understand how their enemy could be so calm and structured. One elderly non-commissioned officer spoke quietly to the younger men around him. "Remember what I said on the ship. A nation at peace builds differently. They plan for the future, and this," he gestured to the clean barracks, "this is what planning looks like." He was right. The more days passed, the more the prisoners began to see the rhythm of American life unfolding around them. Tractors droned across fields from sunrise to sunset. Car horns echoed softly from roads beyond the fence. Children could sometimes be heard laughing in the distance, chasing each other under the trees. This was not the world they came from. This was not the war-torn continent they had left behind. And the strangest part was that the Americans trusted them. Not completely, of course, but enough to allow them outside the fences to harvest crops or repair equipment under relatively light supervision. Slowly, day by day, the prisoners began to relax, not out of comfort, but out of disbelief finally settling into acceptance. They were not here to be beaten. They were not here to be broken. They were here to wait out the war in a land that barely felt the war at all. In the evenings after work, they gathered near the barracks and talked in low voices about the surprise of it all. Some spoke about their families back home. Others wondered how long the conflict would last. A few even admitted, quietly, secretly, that America was nothing like the monstrous picture they had been shown back in Germany. At night, as the camp lights flickered softly and the wind rustled through the nearby trees, many of them stared upward, seeing stars they hadn't seen clearly in years. For the first time in a long time, they felt a sense of calm. And yet, under that calmness, a deeper uncertainty began to grow. Because if America was this organized, this wealthy, this untouched by war, what else were they capable of? How powerful could a nation become when it had so much land, labor, machines, and peace on its own soil? The prisoners only saw the beginning, and soon they would witness something that would shake their understanding of the world even more deeply.
The convoy moved steadily through the gray morning, carrying the prisoners deeper into the interior. For many of the men, this journey felt strangely unreal. Only hours earlier, they had been soldiers in the field, clinging to orders, structure, and purpose. Now they were passengers, watched, unarmed, and uncertain of what waited beyond the horizon. Inside the transport trucks, the air was cool and quiet. No one spoke much. The exhaustion of battle had drained every last spark of resistance from their bodies, leaving behind only a heavy, muted stillness. The engines hummed beneath them, steady and hypnotic, and the rhythm of the road created a slow, dull comfort that felt almost shameful to accept. Some of the younger soldiers sat with their eyes fixed on the passing treetops. They didn't know the names of the towns they drove through or the rivers they crossed. Every landmark belonged to a world that had suddenly become distant and unreachable. For years, they had imagined captivity as a harsh, punishing end. Yet the American soldiers had been surprisingly calm, firm but not cruel. This alone confused them. Nothing in their training had prepared them for respect. The older men sat differently. Their faces carried the weight of years spent in uniform. Some held their caps in their hands, turning them slowly as though trying to polish away the fading traces of the lives they still hoped to return to. They did not look out the windows often. Instead, they stared at the wooden floorboards or the boots of the men across from them, lost in memories too heavy to speak aloud. One prisoner, a former machinist from Bremen, watched the American escort vehicles and wondered about the factories these soldiers came from. He imagined assembly lines, electric lights, huge metal presses, and endless rows of workers producing parts faster than he could picture. Germany had taught him to expect hardship everywhere, but here everything seemed cleaner, more organized, more abundant. It frightened him in a quiet, unfamiliar way. Another prisoner, a young radio operator, kept adjusting the collar of his coat as he replayed the last battle in his mind. He remembered the thunder of artillery, the shouts in the smoke, and the moment they were surrounded. The memory felt distant now, as if it belonged to someone else. The war had moved on without him, leaving him adrift, unsure of who he was without a weapon in his hands. As the convoy continued, they passed through a small American town. People lined the sidewalks, watching the trucks roll by. Some looked curious, others indifferent. A few nodded politely, as if greeting visitors instead of captured soldiers from the other side of a brutal war. The prisoners did not know how to react. They had been warned for years that America was a land of hostility and hatred, but the faces they saw were calm, ordinary, even kind. A few children waved. One little girl, clutching a rag doll to her chest, offered a shy smile. Several of the prisoners looked away quickly, unable to hold her gaze. It was too strange, too human. One man blinked hard, feeling a tightness in his chest he hadn't felt since leaving home. The convoy stopped at a railway station shortly after. The prisoners were told to disembark and line up. They did so carefully, expecting harsh commands. Instead, the Americans gave simple instructions, clear, firm, but never shouted. They were escorted toward a long train with wooden benches and open windows. The air smelled of metal and coal, with a faint sweetness from a nearby field. As they boarded, many of the prisoners noticed something surprising. They were being treated almost like passengers, not criminals. The guards watched them closely, but not with hatred. There was no pushing, no unnecessary force. The radio operator whispered under his breath, barely believing it. Once the train began moving, the landscape widened. Fields stretched out under the midday sun. Barns, silos, and farmhouses appeared and disappeared like slow-moving shadows. Horses grazed calmly behind fences. Grain danced in the wind. The land looked peaceful, so peaceful that some of the prisoners felt their eyes grow heavy. One man, who had spent years working in a labor battalion, stared at the horizon and let out a long breath he didn't know he'd been holding. "It's too big," he murmured to himself. "Everything here is too big." He didn't say it with fear or admiration, only disbelief. As hours passed, the rhythmic clatter of the train lulled many into a half-asleep state. Those who closed their eyes drifted through memories of homes they left behind, families they hadn't written to in months, and futures that now seemed suspended, waiting to be rewritten.
When the train finally slowed, the prisoners felt their stomachs tighten. They expected barbed wire, harsh commands, and cold barracks. But as they stepped off the platform, they were met not with shouting, but with sunlight and open fields stretching far beyond the fences. The camp stood quietly in the distance. Guard towers watched over the land, but the overall impression was something none of them had imagined. It looked almost peaceful, calm, organized, as though captivity here might be something different from the tales told back home. A few of the prisoners exchanged uncertain glances. Some felt hope. Others felt guilt for even allowing hope to enter their minds. But all of them felt the same deep, unspoken truth. Whatever happened next, their lives had already changed. And this silent journey into captivity was only the beginning.
The journey began before dawn, when the camp still lay under a thin blanket of silence. A faint line of pale blue rested on the horizon, not yet strong enough to chase away the cold or the darkness. The prisoners had been told only one thing the night before: prepare to move. No explanation, no destination, just the quiet, heavy certainty that something was changing. By the time the guards arrived to escort them, the air was so still that even the smallest sound, a boot scuff, a cough, the clink of a canteen, seemed unusually sharp. Yet the mood among the men was not chaotic. It was strangely calm, like a group walking into a fog where nothing could be seen, but nothing had to be feared. The trucks waiting outside were covered with canvas tarps, the kind used to protect supplies from rain and dust. Now they were being used to protect the prisoners from the cold morning wind. One by one, the Germans climbed inside, their steps slow, careful, and somewhat resigned. Not fearful, just uncertain. Many exchanged small glances with each other, silent questions no one knew how to answer. Even the guards seemed unsure of the details. They had orders, yes, but they too did not know the final destination, only the direction, west. As the convoy finally began to move, the tires crushed the frost on the dirt road, leaving dark tracks behind. The camp grew smaller and smaller in the distance until it became nothing more than a dot on the blank morning horizon. Some prisoners stared back until the last possible moment. Others kept their gaze forward, following the road ahead. Inside the trucks, the atmosphere was soft and muted. No one wanted to disturb the fragile peace of the early hour. The canvas walls flapped gently with every bump, letting in small breaths of cold air. The wooden benches creaked beneath the shifting weight of tired bodies. Many leaned against each other for balance, forming rows of quiet figures swaying with the motion. After nearly an hour of travel, the trucks left the dirt track and joined a paved road. The change in sound was noticeable, the steady hum of rubber on asphalt replacing the crunch of gravel. Through small openings in the canvas, the men could see the wide American countryside spreading outward in every direction. Large fields rolled past, stretching endlessly, even in winter. Farms and barns appeared occasionally, painted in soft grays by the morning light. Some prisoners whispered that they had never seen land this open before. Others wondered aloud how a country with so much space, so many fields, and so many resources could ever be defeated. The idea seemed impossible. A few guards overheard these soft comments and simply nodded. There was no need for argument. The landscape spoke for itself. Hours passed in the same slow rhythm. The hum of the road, the rocking of the truck, the faint whisper of fabric. Some prisoners dozed briefly, letting the motion lull them into a shallow, uneasy sleep. Others stayed awake, quietly taking in every piece of scenery, as if wanting to remember every detail for the rest of their lives. Eventually, the convoy came to a gentle stop at a checkpoint manned by American military police. This was not unusual. Travel during wartime always required verification, but the prisoners noticed something surprising. The soldiers at the checkpoint looked relaxed, almost casual. They weren't tense, nervous, or suspicious. They checked documents with a calm professionalism, as if this convoy were just another ordinary task in a long list of daily duties. This small detail left an impression. It hinted at something deeper. America felt secure. Despite the war raging oceans away, life inside the country carried on with predictable order. The contrast to Europe, its ruins, shortages, and exhaustion, was impossible to ignore. After the checkpoint, the convoy continued westward. The land slowly shifted again, fields giving way to forests, forests giving way to small towns. Each town was neat and organized, with shops, gas stations, and modest houses arranged along straight, well-paved streets. The prisoners could see American civilians going about their day, a man sweeping the sidewalk, a woman carrying groceries, children running past carrying school books. For German soldiers who had spent years living in chaos, rubble, and scarcity, the normalcy was almost unreal. As the afternoon approached, the trucks finally turned off the main road into a wide, heavily guarded military facility. Tall fences, watchtowers, and large steel gates made it unmistakably secure. Yet it was not the grim image the prisoners had expected. The guards here were calm, efficient, and surprisingly courteous. They did not shout or threaten. They simply guided the men out of the trucks, checked their names again, and instructed them to follow a marked path. The path led past long rows of barracks, clean, well-built, and orderly. The camp resembled a small town more than a prison. There were mess halls, workshops, medical stations, and exercise yards. Nothing luxurious, but everything was functional, organized, and remarkably structured. Some prisoners blinked in disbelief. Others murmured to each other in awe. One man whispered that he had never seen a German camp this well supplied, not even for German soldiers, let alone prisoners. One of the American officers walked beside them, explaining quietly that this facility was temporary. Soon they would be transported even deeper inland, far from the coasts, to states with more space and larger agricultural programs. Their labor would be assigned, their days scheduled, their futures, at least for now, decided. But the officer also added something else, something unexpected. "You'll be safe here, that much I can promise." The words hung in the air, gentle and warm in a place built for war. That evening, the prisoners were given blankets, meals, and a place to rest. As night settled across the camp, a soft calm filled the air. The men lay on their bunks, listening to the distant sound of a generator humming steadily in the darkness. No bombs, no gunfire, no alarms or orders shouted in panic, just quiet. The road had brought them to the unknown, but the unknown, they realized, might not be a place to fear. It might be a place to begin again.
Night settled slowly over the camp, the way winter evenings often did. Quietly, as if the sky were laying down a blanket over everything it touched. Inside the barracks, the men had finished their meager dinner, and a soft murmur drifted through the long wooden room. Some played cards in silence. Others wrote letters by the dim lanterns. A few simply lay on their bunks, staring at the weak cracks between the boards above them. Among them was Carl. Carl had not spoken much since they arrived. He was older than most, with deep creases around his eyes and hands that trembled slightly when he wrote. He had been a machinist back home,
A simple man with simple dreams. A small workshop, a wife who hummed when she cooked, a son who followed him everywhere with wooden toys. That was the life he carried in his head. But the war had carried him somewhere else. Tonight, though, Carl sat hunched over a small scrap of paper. It was barely larger than a postcard. The pencil in his hand was worn nearly to the point of breaking, but he wrote slowly, carefully, as if every word needed to be shaped from memory. The guard on duty, Harris, noticed him. Harris had been walking his rounds, boots crunching softly on the gravel outside the thin walls. He paused, listening. Something about the stillness inside reminded him of winter evenings back home on the farm, when he and his father would sit quietly by the stove, each in his own thoughts. When he finally stepped inside, the prisoners looked up briefly, then returned to their tasks. They had grown used to him. Harris did not shout. He did not push. He simply observed, a habit from a childhood where silence often spoke louder than words. He walked between the bunks until he reached Carl. For a moment, he watched the man write, the pencil moving slowly across the paper. "Letter home?" Harris asked softly. Carl looked up, his expression neither hostile nor friendly, just tired. He nodded once. Harris noticed something. There was no envelope, no address at the top, not even a name. "You're not sending it?" Harris asked. Carl shook his head. I don't know where they are now," he whispered, his German thick but understandable. "My town was—" He trailed off, searching for the word. "Bombed. I heard it from someone who arrived here last month. I don't know if they survived." For a moment, the barracks felt even quieter. Harris swallowed. He had no answer for that, no comfort he could offer that wouldn't sound empty. "What are you writing, then?" he asked gently. Carl hesitated, then said, "Sometimes writing is all a man can do." He turned the paper slightly so Harris could read it. The handwriting was rough but steady. "My dear Anna, if this letter finds no one, then maybe that is mercy. I hope you and our boy found safety. If not, then may these words travel where I cannot. I am alive. I am not hurt. I work, I sleep, and I wait. I dream of our home. I dream of your voice in the kitchen. I dream of our son's hand in mine. I dream because dreaming is the only place where war cannot reach me." Harris didn't move for a long moment. "You want to send it anyway?" he asked finally. Carl shook his head again. "Where would it go?" he whispered. "There is no address." Harris looked down at the letter again. Something tugged at him, a feeling he hadn't expected. Maybe sympathy, maybe respect, maybe just the recognition that the man in front of him was not an enemy tonight, just a father, lost in the dark, trying to leave a trace of himself in the world. "You can give it to me," Harris said quietly. "I'll try. It may not reach them, but it deserves a chance." Carl stared at him, eyes shining in the lamplight, unsure whether to believe him. Slowly, he folded the paper and held it out. Harris took it carefully, as if it were fragile. "I can't promise anything," he said. "I know," Carl replied. Later that night, after the lanterns had dimmed and the barracks had fallen still, Harris walked alone toward his station. He could hear the wind brushing lightly against the fence. The sky was dotted with stars, faint in the winter haze. He pulled out the folded letter, a letter with no address. He knew the mail system couldn't deliver something like this. Regulations were strict, and anything without proper identification would be discarded. But still, something inside him refused to let it vanish. He decided he would write his own note, explaining what he knew, the town, the family name, the possible location. Maybe someone would recognize it. Maybe it would return to Europe after the war. Maybe somewhere across continents and ruins, a woman named Anna might hold it in her hands one day. Or maybe it would be lost forever. But even then, Harris thought, at least the words had been written. At least they would not die in the barracks where hope had grown thin. He folded the letter again and placed it inside his coat, close to his chest. Back in the barracks, Carl lay awake, staring at the ceiling. His bunk was hard, and the cold drifted through the cracks. But a small warmth had settled inside him. A flicker, nothing more. Someone had cared enough to try. Someone who wore a different uniform. Someone who didn't speak his language well. Someone he had been told to fear. And in that moment, Carl felt a gentle easing in his chest. Not hope, not yet, but something softer. A reminder that even behind fences and under watchtowers, humanity could still survive the winter. He closed his eyes. For the first time since the day he was captured, he slept without dreaming of war.
The night before the prisoners were scheduled to leave the camp was unlike any other. For months, the men had wondered whether this moment would ever come. Some had dreamed of it, others feared it. But now, as the sun lowered itself behind the tall watchtowers for the last time, a strange, quiet energy flowed through the barracks. Not joy exactly, and not sorrow, but something softer, something shaped by exhaustion, hope, and the weight of memory. Inside Barrack 12, the air carried the wooden scent of the bunks, the faint dust of the day, and the lingering warmth of bodies that had lived too closely together for too long. As darkness seeped in, the men lit their small lamps one by one. Pools of amber light formed gently across the long room, giving everything the warm glow of a fading photograph. For the first time since their capture, some of the men carefully took out the things they had hidden away from one another. Letters folded so tightly they almost cracked at the edges, small pictures wrapped in cloth, a watch without a strap, a comb carved from a scrap of wood, a button saved from a lost uniform. Each object carried a story. Each object was a reminder of who they had been before the war, before hunger, before frostbite, before long lines and endless roll calls. Keller sat at the far end of the barracks, turning a small piece of paper between his fingers. It was the last letter he had received before being taken prisoner, a short note from his sister asking him to come home soon. The ink had faded, but the words still held him like a hand on his shoulder. Tomorrow, he thought, he would finally step onto a ship headed toward the horizon he had not seen in so long. But he felt no triumph, no celebration, only a gentle, uncertain calm. At another bunk, Weber slowly packed the few belongings he had collected. He folded his blanket neatly, then refolded it a second time, as if trying to keep his hands busy so his thoughts wouldn't drift to the things he feared he might find or not find when he stepped back into the world. When he finally sat down, he rubbed his hands together quietly, feeling the roughness of calluses formed from months of labor. Around them, the men spoke in low, quiet tones. Their voices blended softly with the night, a murmur of stories, of memories, of questions no one dared ask too loudly. What would Germany look like now? Who was left? Would they be welcomed home or met with cold stares and silent judgment? War transformed countries as much as it transformed people, and no one knew what waited for them beyond the ocean. The guards, too, moved differently that night. Their patrols were slower, their footsteps softer on the gravel. Some paused by the fences,
watching the prisoners with an expression that was hard to read. War had thrown them all into roles none of them had expected, captor and captive, enemy and guardian, but after so many months together, the lines had blurred into something more human than the labels they wore. Just outside the barracks, under the pale glow of the moon, the American camp doctor made his final rounds. He checked on the men who had been ill, offering medicine and quiet reassurance. He spoke in steady, measured tones, as if trying to push away the tension that floated in the cool night air. Many of the prisoners nodded respectfully as he passed, their eyes reflecting a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. Even in war, kindness had its place. As the night deepened further, the sounds of the camp changed. The clatter of tools, the shouts of orders, and the hum of machinery faded into the stillness. What remained was the gentle rustle of blankets, the occasional creak of wooden boards, and the distant chorus of crickets, a reminder that the world outside the barbed wire continued its slow, steady rhythm, untouched by the anxieties of the men inside. Some prisoners stepped outside the barracks and looked up at the sky. It was clear and wide, filled with stars stretching endlessly above the dark silhouettes of the watchtowers. For a moment, the men stood quietly beside one another, breathing in the cool night air. In that fragile silence, the war seemed impossibly far away. The fences were still there, the guards were still posted, but the sky made everything feel softer, smaller, almost peaceful. One man whispered that he had forgotten what starlight looked like from home. Another said he hoped his children had not forgotten him. A third simply closed his eyes, as if capturing the moment in memory, carrying it with him wherever the next day might lead. Inside the barracks, the lamps burned a little dimmer. More men lay down on their bunks, pulling their blankets around their shoulders. They didn't sleep at first. They listened to each other, to the wind, to the quiet beating of their own hearts. The night felt like a final page turning slowly, gently after a long, heavy chapter. And when sleep finally came, it came softly, not the restless, uneasy kind that had filled so many nights before, but a calm, drifting sleep, the kind that comes after a long journey towards something unknown, when all that's left is to wait for the morning light. Tomorrow they would walk through the gates. Tomorrow the war would begin to release its hold on them. Tomorrow they would finally be going home.
Dawn came softly on the final morning, as if the sky itself wished not to disturb the men who had survived long enough to see it. A pale silver light stretched across the camp, pushing away the thinning winter mist. Frost still clung to the barbed wire, turning each twisted knot into a bead of glass. For the first time in months, the cold felt gentle, not sharp. It was a morning that carried no orders, no roll calls, no shouted commands, only quiet. Word had spread slowly during the night, passed from bunk to bunk in hushed voices. The trucks are coming. Today we leave. No one celebrated, no one dared. Freedom was a heavy word, too heavy to lift until it was truly in front of them. Some prisoners woke early, sitting on the edge of their wooden bunks, staring at the spaces where they had carved their days into the bed frames. Notches, initials, little marks of existence, proof that they had fought their own war against time. Others quietly folded their blankets, smoothing out corners, as if they were at last preparing to return to a world where care mattered again. Outside, the American guards watched the camp with a rare stillness. They seemed to understand the weight of the morning, and they did not rush the men. Some simply nodded as prisoners walked by, a small gesture of respect between former enemies who had shared months of harsh winter and waiting. In these final hours, uniforms mattered far less than humanity. A bell rang softly near the gate, just once, not the repeated clang of routine. It was the signal to gather. The prisoners walked slowly across the yard, boots crunching on the frost, breath rising in pale clouds. No one pushed forward, no one tried to reach the front. It was enough simply to walk without fear, to know that every step was leading them somewhere beyond the wire. Near the gate, a long line of American trucks waited. Their engines idled softly, the warm exhaust turning the air into drifting smoke. The metal sides were painted in dull military greens, but to the prisoners, they looked brighter than anything they had seen in years. These vehicles would take them away from this frozen corner of the world, to processing centers, to trains, and eventually to ships that would sail them back home. But before boarding, each man stopped for a moment at the boundary they had lived behind, the barbed wire fence. Frost sparkled across it like stars. Even now, knowing it was no longer a barrier, they felt its presence. It had shaped their days, limited their hopes, and forced them to confront themselves. One by one, they stepped beyond it. Some touched the wooden posts quietly, as if closing a chapter with their fingertips. Others kept their eyes forward, unwilling to give the fence even a final glance. After so long in captivity, every emotion, relief, fear, disbelief, moved through them at once, leaving many strangely numb. A German sergeant in his late 40s stood longer than the rest. His hands trembled slightly at his sides, but not from the cold. For months he had believed he might never see his children again. Now the possibility was real, almost frightening in its suddenness. A young American guard approached him gently. "You're free to go, Sergeant," the guard said softly. The man nodded, unable to speak, and walked toward the trucks with slow, measured steps. As the trucks filled, the camp grew strangely quiet, almost hollow. Empty barracks waited in long rows like silent witnesses. Smoke drifted from the chimney of the old kitchen building, though no breakfast would be served there again. The watchtowers stood empty, their silhouettes no longer symbols of fear, but of things now left behind. When the last truck finally closed its rear gate, the American officer in charge stepped forward. He raised his hand, gave a brief signal, and the convoy began to move. Tires rolled over the frozen ground, engines churned, and the long line of trucks pulled away from the place that had held so many stories, some painful, some hopeful, all unforgettable. As they drove down the snowy road, many prisoners looked back through the small slits in the canvas covers. The camp grew smaller behind them, then faded into the morning fog until it was nothing more than a pale shape against the distant hills. No one said goodbye. Some places in life do not need words to be left. Ahead of them, the world widened. The landscape opened into fields and quiet farms where smoke rose from chimneys and people carried out the simple routines of life. After so much confinement, the sight of open land felt unreal. Even the color of the sky seemed deeper, almost overwhelming. Inside one truck, a young prisoner whispered, "It feels impossible." Another replied, "Everything after this will feel new." The road continued, winding through forests where branches dripped with melting frost. The sun slowly rose higher, warming the earth, thawing the night's cold hold. The prisoners watched it with awe. For the first time in a long time, they felt its warmth without thinking of survival. As the convoy passed a small river, the officer allowed the trucks to slow. The water shimmered beneath thin sheets of ice, flowing quietly around them. It was a gentle reminder that the world had kept moving even while they had been trapped. Nature had waited for no one, and now it welcomed them back. Hours later, as the trucks approached the nearest processing station, the prisoners knew their journeys were far from over. Some would face long paths home. Some would return to cities changed beyond recognition. Some would discover losses they had not yet imagined. And yet, none of them traveled alone. They carried the memories of the men who survived beside them, and the lessons of the camp: endurance, humanity, and the quiet strength that grows in the darkest places. Their war was ending. Their lives were beginning again. Beyond the barbed wire, the world waited.